Today's episode is brought to you by Audible. Get your free audiobook by going to audibletrial.com/Lutheran Cartographer. The Lutheran Cartographer, Episode 7. Alrighty, welcome to the Lutheran Cartographer. We're joined today by Pastor Oliphant from the Chicago suburbs. Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you ended up in Chicago, and how it compares to some of the other places you've been.
All right. So I was born in Houston, Texas, and we lived there the first couple of years of my life. Then work took my family up to northern Oklahoma to a town called Ponca City. And after living there for about 5 years, we moved down to Dallas, back to Texas, and went to a Lutheran elementary school there in the north suburbs of Dallas in Plano. And then just before I started 8th grade, we moved out to New Mexico, to rural New Mexico, about a town about a half an hour east of Albuquerque called Edgewood. And then we lived there, and I was in New Mexico all through high school and college. Then after college, moved up to Fort Wayne, Indiana to go to seminary, Concordia Theological Seminary. And then after that, I was, my first call, I was placed in a town called North Plato, St. Peter's Lutheran Church, North Plato. And that's in northern Illinois, about an hour west of Chicago. And I was there for a little over 4 years. And then I received a call to serve Redeemer here in Elmhurst. And I came here about 4 years ago, just over 4 years ago. October 14th is my anniversary here. And so I came here, through the process of, you live in the area, so you get to know people. And then when there's a vacancy, somebody knows somebody who knows somebody, and the names get passed along for who would be a good candidate. And that was how I ended up at Redeemer.
Good deal. So you've lived a wide range of places. What would you say, how would you compare and contrast the Chicago area with some of those other places in terms of some of the good things, in terms of comparing them with other places?
I really like Chicago. It's a great area. I don't live in the city proper, but we're about a 20-minute train ride from downtown, so I can be there in no time at all. Always something to do. It doesn't matter the time of year. There's always something going on. Because we have hard winters, they know how to deal with them. And so you can stay inside, or you can go and check out and see all the various things they have going all over the city during the winter. And then, of course, in the summer, I think there's a festival or some kind of event every weekend between Memorial Day and Labor Day, somewhere in one of the neighborhoods. So there's always something going on. And usually it's pretty well done, too. Of course, we have magnificent museums. There's the Art Institute downtown. There's the Museum of Science and Industry. It's very child-oriented for a kind of STEM learning. The Field Museum, of course, is famous as well as a natural history museum. So just tons of things like that to do all over the place. I mentioned the winters. The winters here are definitely the hardest winters I think I've ever had in my life. So that was
wow, harder than Indiana even.
Yeah, that was a big adjustment coming from Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. In New Mexico, we lived at elevation, so we had snow, but we just didn't have this bone-crunching cold that grips here. We had the polar vortex set in a couple of days up here last winter, and I think it was negative 50-something wind chill or something. It was so there are some things that have taken a little bit of getting used to, but any place you live, there's going to be something that's something that you enjoy and something that you enjoy a little bit less. So
that's true. So to sum up what you just said, so really one of the neat things for you about Chicago is that opportunity to do all these different activities as the time allows, and also all these neat places to go. You mentioned the museums. Is that a pretty good sum up of what you just said?
Yeah, it's just a lot of opportunities that I don't think I've had in other places that I've lived, whether it's, what's going on with different foods from different nationalities or arts and culture. It's just there's something for just about everybody.
That's really neat. Could you give us a concrete example of something that you've had the opportunity to do recently that you might not have been able to do in another place?
I hold a membership at the Art Institute, so I can come and go there as I want without paying the entrance fee every time. And so they will have exhibits from all over the world, from world famous museums in Europe, or they borrow from some of the other museums in the United States. And so they'll have all sorts of exhibits going on. I think right now they have an Andy Warhol exhibit that just opened up. Unfortunately, it was busy that weekend, so I couldn't go to the member opening weekend where it's a little bit smaller crowd. So things like that, or if you feel like trying out Ethiopian food, you can find an Ethiopian restaurant pretty easily. So it's just as easy as Googling it, and then it's within either it's right on a train line or it's within a reasonable Uber fare. So
good deal. You mentioned that there are places, with any place you go, there are good things and there are some not so good things. What are some things about the Chicago area that are that not so great part?
Well, one of the things that Chicago is kind of famous for is its crime.
Yeah.
So that's definitely, there are areas in the city that are are very high crime and can be pretty dangerous. Of course, it's not the entire city there. It usually gets isolated into areas. So that's one of the things that you kind of want to just keep an eye open for and make sure that you're, if it's something you don't feel like you're prepared to go to, then to make sure you don't head that way. There's that. I mentioned the winters. The traffic, of course, is pretty challenging, but usually you can bypass that on the train. So there are a few things that come with just being in a big city, where there are a lot of people trying to get somewhere or do something, and then everybody kind of gets in each other's way at some point. And so that can lead to various problems.
Yeah, that you often, like you said, those are a lot of problems that you see in many big cities. Are there any things that you especially think are unique to Chicago that you don't like as much?
Yes. As far as just places that I've lived, another thing you hear about is Chicago politics, the high level of corruption that goes very high up within the government, and everybody it seems like most of the folks that have been around here for a long time have just gotten so accustomed to it that it's kind of lost its shock value until you come in as an outsider and you're just amazed that so many people are indifferent to such vast levels of corruption. And so that's another thing. And, after a while you learn to make jokes about it too. And so that's something that I found that's pretty unique to here.
Okay. Does that affect the day-to-day much in terms of the operation of your church or your personal life?
No, not so much for me. Since I don't live in Chicago proper and my congregation is also in the suburbs, it doesn't affect us as much. Each of the suburbs have their own local governments, and so they have a large degree of control over things like that. And usually when you're in a smaller community like one of the villages or the suburbs here, that kind of thing does get noticed and people do react to it the way that you would expect them to.
Okay, I see. Now, the crime problem that you talked about just a little bit ago, do you see that much out in the suburbs, or is that mainly in the city proper?
It's mainly in the city proper. You do see it in a handful of the suburbs. You can divide the suburbs usually by where the freeways go. So you have an inner ring, the inner ring suburbs that are right next to the city, and sometimes you see the crime overflowing into that. And then you have the outer ring suburbs. We are right on one of the freeways, and so I don't know, maybe we're like middle ring. I'm not sure if that even exists in most people's differentiation, but
so the best of both worlds or the worst of both worlds.
Right. But Elmhurst the town that I serve in is a very family oriented town. the last time I saw some demographics on it, over a fourth of the population of this town is 18 or under. The school district in Elmhurst is pretty widely renowned as being one of the top in the state, and it's they're very everything that is done by the local government here is done with an eye toward keeping Elmhurst as the type of place you would want to raise a family.
That's really good to hear. Say a little bit more about the raising the family in Elmhurst. What has been the observations of your parishioners in terms of what it's like raising a family there, or things that they've seen?
Yeah, a lot of people that I know. So I am single and don't have any children, but I have a lot of parishioners that do. And a lot of the people that do live in Elmhurst proper, which is just bluntly put, it's a very expensive town to live in. But the folks who do stick around in Elmhurst city limits, they stick around for things like the school district, for the various opportunities, for the sports leagues and the parks and things like that come with living, within the city limits of Elmhurst. And so I have noticed that it tends to keep everybody running everywhere all the time. Because everything is family oriented, there's a big push toward having everybody in sports and dance and all sorts of various activities that can pretty easily lead to what I would consider to be overscheduling. That's that's a problem that you'll find in a lot of different places now. I remember when I was in high school, the school district in rural New Mexico they said, well, we really won't have anything planned on Wednesday nights because we know that that's church night for a lot of families, or they have some sort of education night at their churches, and so it was set aside. You would never hear of anything like that around here now. Every night, every weekend is booked with something, and so that, I guess, that is the flip side of the coin, where everything is geared toward being very family oriented. You're gonna start to run into time issues.
I see. And kind of going back to what you were saying earlier about there being so many opportunities to do great things in the Chicago area, that also comes with the flip side of everybody's booked up and you have to be very intentional about making time for church and important things in life, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So let's transition a bit to, since this is a podcast about the Lutheran cartographer, talking about what it's like being a Lutheran in different areas of the country. What would you say it's like being a Lutheran in the Chicago area?
Chicago historically has been a strongly Lutheran city. I know that because of the various immigrant populations that made up the city early on, that it was heavily Roman Catholic, but Lutherans definitely have had a big impact in Chicago. And so there are tons of congregations. In the LCMS, we have the different geographic districts. I'm non-geographic now, I'm English district, but we do have the geographic districts. And the state of Illinois has so many Lutheran congregations within the state that it has to be divided into Northern Illinois, Central Illinois, and Southern Illinois. Northern Illinois is pretty much Chicago going west all the way out to Rockford. And the reason why they had to divide it was because there's so many congregations here. There are a lot of Lutherans. You definitely can you can find a good circle to talk with. I have a good circle of Lutheran pastors that I spend time with at least monthly, so that we can kind of hang out, compare notes, and also just have some good social time too. So you do have a lot of them. Because there are so many Lutheran congregations, that means that there are also a large number of Lutheran schools as well. So scattered kind of throughout the suburbs, and even in the city, you have a couple too. You have everything ranging from preschools all the way up to high schools. And then, of course, Concordia University Chicago is in River Forest. So that's our own LCMS college locally here. And so you do have a strong, because Lutherans did have, because there were so many of them in the greater Chicago area, you still can see footprints of that. Of course, with church attendance declining across the board in every denomination, you don't see it like you did back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but you still can kind of see the footprints that Lutherans left in the Chicago area, just with the infrastructure that still exists, and just the number of folks that casually comes up in conversation. Oh, I'm a Lutheran too. So yeah.
Neat. So it sounds like there's really a good community there for people to step into if they are coming in from other places.
Yes, and that was something that I found when I was first ordained and I was in the Northern Illinois district. It was a very easy time kind of getting to know people, and a lot of pastors don't serve where they grew up, and so there's that understanding that if you moved here for work or for whatever reason, that everybody came from somewhere, but we all have this great thing in common, that we believe the same things.
Absolutely. Let's take a moment to thank our sponsor. If you're listening to this podcast on a device, you know the power of having audio on the go, whether it's running errands, doing chores. Audible wants to bring the power of audio to you with books. And right now, you can go get a free book through Audible to try out their service. You can go to audibletrial.com/Lutheran Cartographer and check out their wide array of books. I'd recommend checking out Luther's Table Talk. You can get it for free with this trial offer, and you can listen to 7 hours of the wit and wisdom of Martin Luther. But if Table Talk isn't to your taste, you can try something else out. They have a huge audio catalog to choose from. So go to audibletrial.com/Lutheran Cartographer to check out that free trial. So let's transition a bit to one of the things that I really look forward to in the podcast, and that is asking you about hidden gems in your area, places to eat or things to do or things to see that you'd really recommend that anybody visiting or traveling there should definitely do.
One thing I think that I know that Chicago is famous for it, but I don't think it's famous enough for it, is the architecture. One of the best things that I've done in the city was when my family came up to visit, we took the river architecture tour, where we're on the Chicago River downtown, and you see all of these buildings that you've never seen them from that angle, because normally you're walking down the street or you're driving down the street, and so you see them on the side that was presented but a lot of the buildings were designed also to be observed from the river. And so you have everything from classical, neoclassical, modern, postmodern. You have all sorts of these just terrific buildings, and they're built to complement each other. That's one of the other unique things that you pick up when you're on this tour, is the guides will say, and so this building was designed to mirror the one that's just across that big open space. And
so you get the context, kind of.
Yeah, so you're able to see how everything kind of has influenced, and then of course they will talk about historically how the Chicago fire changed everything, and how this building survived, but then it was revamped. And so just look at I think that was a really good overview, both of the history of the area, and then also kind of how it's this continually developing city that really has had this emphasis on being a feast for the eyes.
Nice. Any places that you'd recommend to eat?
Oh, yes. I think the best Chicago style pizza, which is a must for any visitors, to go to Pequod's. That's in the city. It's on the north side of the city. So go to Pequod's, and then since you're headed that way anyway, just jump back on the train and head up to Wrigley Field and enjoy Wrigleyville. So yeah, I would say that's a restaurant that you definitely have to visit. And then of course, go to Greektown, get some gyros in Greektown. You can go to any of the neighborhoods, and any of the neighborhoods that were specifically influenced by different immigrant groups that came in, and definitely enjoy that, because great Italian food, great Greek food, everything.
Nice. Any other things that you'd recommend doing or seeing?
Well, there are a lot of sports teams here, so any sports fans, there will always be a game, no matter what time of year you come here, there will always be a game going on, and I think the Chicago sports teams have this great advantage of having an extremely passionate fan base, which makes being present at the stadiums just a lot of fun.
Okay. So I'm going to show my ignorance of Chicago sports right now, but bear with me. So we've got the White Sox, the Cubs, the Bears for football and baseball.
Hmm.
What else is there in term basketball, hockey? I don't know the teams.
Right. So basketball, we've got the Bulls.
Okay. Oh, of
Uh,
course. How
yeah.
could I forget that?
And then hockey is the Blackhawks.
Okay.
The Bulls and the Blackhawks actually play in the same space at United Center, and so depending on what day, it might be iced over or it might be wood. So and that actually is a pretty interesting process in itself. Kind of watching how they transition the same playing space for those two very different sports. And then, of course, for soccer fans, there's a Chicago Fire.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about advice or thoughts for people who are thinking about moving to Chicago. What sort of people do you think Chicago would suit them well? And what kind of advice would you have for people that are thinking about moving to the area?
Well, I'd advise people to pay very close attention to the areas that they're moving to. The suburbs are each one is very different, both as far as cost of living goes. Some of the suburbs are very expensive, some of them are less expensive. The property taxes vary wildly between them, and so to pay close attention to kind of the hidden costs that'll be there, not just the market value of the house. That it's definitely built for folks who don't mind either braving traffic or jumping on a train and spending anywhere between 20 minutes and an hour to go and see a bunch of stuff. So you have to have a little bit of patience, but for those who do have patience to kind of wait and see what'll be revealed, there's a lot of reward in that. So those would be probably the two biggest pieces of advice that I would give.
All right. So now let's talk about some of the stereotypes that people might have about Chicago. And I think we've addressed some of this already, but if you'd be willing to just really quickly, or if you wish to take longer, just say, yes, that's true. No, that isn't true. And if you'd like to elaborate, you're more than welcome to. So let's start with Chicago is cold and windy.
Yes, that is true. It is cold. It's not as windy as folks would think, with the nickname being the Windy City. I actually had heard that the nickname the Windy City didn't come from the weather. I heard that it came from the politicians.
All that hot air.
And that they used to just blow with the wind.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't actually done any research into that, but I had heard that actually long before I moved here. But yeah, it is cold and windy. We are having an unusually cold beginning of November right now. We had record snow on October, but again, because it was record snow, it was unusual. So we had that, on October 31st. So it was the very tail end of October, but it was still too early for my taste. So yes, it is cold and windy during the winter and even the spring, but I think the summers and the falls here are just outstanding, just absolutely perfect. It doesn't get sweltering hot like other places that I've lived. I can go outside and not feel like I'm about to just burst into flame.
Expire.
Yeah. And then, of course, the falls here, this fall was an exceptionally beautiful one with the tree colors. But we always do have beautiful falls, beautiful autumns here. And you can go out to Cantini Park, or you can go to the Arboretum. That's even a little bit further west of me, in the suburbs here, and just kind of take in what autumn looks. When you picture like a postcard autumn, that's what you'll find here. So it's it is cold during the cold seasons, but during the other seasons, it's really nice.
All right. So the summers are worth living, and the autumns are worth living through that hard winter then.
Yes, which is why a few of my parishioners, the snowbirds will move down to Florida during the winter and early spring, and then they're usually back in time for Easter. But yeah, I don't blame them one bit.
All right.
They did their time.
Next stereotype. Chicago politicians are corrupt.
Of course, not all of them, and it's not just limited to Chicago. The state governors also have their fair level of corruption too. So,
All right.
yeah, I would say that in general, that's kind of what I found to be true.
Okay. And like we talked about earlier, it might not affect one's day-to-day life much, but it definitely is something that's an annoyance at best.
Yes.
All right. Okay. One of the things that people see in other areas of the country is a problem with homelessness. Is that in cities? Is that something that Chicago deals with? With it being so cold in the winter, is that really something that you guys see much of?
We do see some of it in the summers. It's not nearly as pronounced as other places that I've been to, places that I've visited. I mean, you're from the Pacific Northwest, and so you have a very good idea of kind of what the situation looks like in Seattle. But so yeah, I think that the winters kind of do discourage anybody kind of permanently setting up any kind of homeless encampments. You do see it in the warmer seasons, as you'll find in almost any major city. But I can't say that I've seen it as pronounced as other places that I visited. Now, I will say though that one thing that I learned after I became a pastor here is that in Chicago proper, there's a very high rate of various kinds of mental illness.
Oh,
And that extends not only to the homeless population, but that does extend to other areas too. I won't pretend to have a reason for why, but that is something that I learned after I was ordained and started working with folks. And almost everybody knows somebody in the city who has some kind of debilitating problem.
okay. All right. So now, as we start to close out the podcast, I want to make sure to give you the floor and the opportunity to tell us about any things that you'd like to point our listeners to, whether it's your church website, places they can follow your work online, things like that.
Our church website is Redeemer Elmhurst, or Redeemer of Elmhurst. I probably should have that thing memorized. But if you look up Redeemer Lutheran Church, Elmhurst, Illinois, you'll find it. And if you do take the time to look, you'll see what I think is some of the most beautiful stained glass in the entire Missouri Synod. And so you'll find some great church art. There's something that's been a long focus of the congregation here, is to really just have a beautiful space and enriched services with terrific music. And you'll find that in a number of congregations here. I think that the Lutheran presence in Chicago, as Lutherans typically do, is it's a very quiet but very profound effect on areas where they are. That there's something that actually changes in the fabric of the area whenever Lutherans are as enmeshed and when they have such deep roots. And so you can find those, you can still find those influences here. You can still find the echoes of them, whether it's just in the beautiful church buildings or kind of the robust Lutheran education that's found throughout the area. But you can definitely find that this is an area where people who believe that we are saved by grace alone, received through faith alone, that there's been an influence in that.
That's really good to hear. Thank you again for your time. Any parting thoughts for our listeners?
It's a big world, and you can find Lutherans just about anywhere. So take the time and explore and meet them.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you again, Pastor Oliphant. God's peace to you.
All right. Thank you. I'm with you.
Thanks for listening to the Lutheran Cartographer. For more information about the things we talked about today, check out the show notes page at lutherancartographer.com/7. If you enjoyed the podcast, I encourage you to take a moment to rate and review us on iTunes. That way more people see the show and can listen to it. And last, if you'd like to check out that Audible offer, you can do so at audibletrial.com/lutherancartographer. I'm Nicholas Weber. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.